really the reason why I started, kind of calling attention to the culture and speaking out was because I noticed that the way that society is structured right now is having a negative impact on our social emotional well-being.
Right.
I mean, just look around, watch the news, look how relationships are being destroyed, look how all of this is happening, and it is the dehumanization caused by this new ideas.
So what exactly is the goal? Like, is it just to help people be a little, like kids be a little more social, or is it to make them care or think about certain things the way you or maybe other teachers, SEL teachers, think and feel about certain things? Like
empathy is pushed. We navigate the world, how we respond to what's in front of us, what's down the road. All of those things determine our ultimate success and well-being. So I started working on a different framework, and I came up with 6 different attitudes and practices that if we are able to focus on those 6 practices day in and day out and in the moment, then we will be more resilient. And for example, one of those attitudes is to develop a value-centered identity, where you choose, every individual chooses, and I go through this in my workshop, but there's a long value list, and I have people, we select what are your personal values, and how do I guide my life, how do I guide my personal behavior in accordance with my values. So how can I be true to myself all the time, rather than my identity is shaped by what society tells me my skin color or what gender or one of those things, one of those stereotype categories. So how do I lead from a value center? Like I said, I started asking questions around 2017, 2018. So it was already happening in my department, and we were already training the teachers. We were already doing these ideas. It wasn't until when 2020, when Castle like officially changed it and did it. I mean, everybody, we were already doing it. Right. They just like I guess legally and whatever
put it on the paperwork.
They just put it on the paperwork. But you're right. It gets things like that get through because of that teacher's lens. And right now, teachers, the lens that they're having is through this philosophical framework that views the individual as the source of injustice and the source of everything that's wrong with the world. Mm-hmm. Whereas my thinking of SEL is, how can we fortify the individual? How can we strengthen cross-group relationships? How can we tamp down those things within our human nature that are destructive? And how do we bring out those things in us that are great?
But okay, so talk a little bit about that connection, how the individual versus the collective, and what the shift that they did there.
Well, a complete shift. Like now, self-awareness includes your racial identity and gender identity, and I don't know what it means to like, okay, as a white, what is my identity? The oppressor, as what is a black identity? What is an Asian identity? What are these different things? Mm-hmm. Nobody ever says what is a woman. We can't even answer that basic question now, but people are supposed to identify in one of these check boxes. Mm-hmm. So what that does is it devalues the individual automatically. Yeah. We've automatically devalued the individual, which strengthens our in-group bias. It strengthens the human capacity for prejudice, aggression, and cruelty. So we're building a society that we're eroding from the inside, essentially.
Right. And so are there there, yeah, because basically the first question is, which group are you in? Right? It basically starts out with, first, before we do anything, we need to understand what group you're
Yep.
in. So let's put you in this, gender box, or in this race box, or some box, and then we go from there. And so you also talk about how it's like, I think I mentioned it, like one of the legs on the tripod of this, concerted push. So you got DEI. Talk about how SEL ties into DEI and anti-racism and all those kind of things.
Well, in my department, we were also tasked with doing equity work. And
that's the best work.
And that's what I've been told. And I know Austin has on the books, one of their goals through the National Equity Project is equal outcomes for all students.
Sounds about right.
And I asked, what does that mean? How do we get there without tyranny? And nobody had an answer for that.
Tyranny.
What we're doing is that we're advancing very radical ideas in our culture. Let's go back to our founding fathers. They put forth some really radical ideas in the 1700s, and it took a war. It took years of suffering. Maybe you could say it wasn't maybe until the 80s or 90s before that vision was actualized in society. Right now, we're doing the same thing with ideology that historically has always led to death. And we're doing it in Canada, we're doing it all through Europe. Every single Western democratized nation is utilizing this new philosophy.
But with a smile.
Under the guise of compassion. A lot of people think that, we're continuing the civil rights movement, and have no really idea that what they're doing is engaging in ideas and practices that are breaking down the individual, literally chipping away at the human spirit right now.
Yeah.
Or utopia.
Go ahead, Will.
No, yeah. One thing that's interesting there is the kind of idea of compassionate control or compassionate dictatorship. That's something that I actually find really interesting as a political scientist. So I think in America, we've always kind of imagined that dictatorship would look like 1984. Like it's a jackboot stepping on a face forever, right? And in reality, it's turning out to look a little more like Brave New World, where Justin Trudeau, the former Playboy Prime Minister of Canada, stands up and looking like he's going to burst into tears, and sort of his notably soft face for a man says, we're going to ban 1,500 varieties of guns because how can we not? Just one life. And it seems like this sort of thing, if it's misused, can very much play into that. Mm-hmm. So you're 100%. Not understanding my lived Black experience. So we're going to have to lower your SEL score. In business is very real. Actually, it's your ESG score until you come to appreciate me. So we're seeing the exact opposite of what we've always thought tyranny would be. It's not, I'm going to whip your ass and take your land away from you. It's, well, unless someone wants to stand up and say that they are for, mass shootings or drunk driving or whatever the right is that's about to be taken away, we're all in agreement, aren't we, that we're all going to follow this system because it's anti-racist, it's empathic, it's pro-equity. These are the buzzwords we're all hearing in our different fields. And once you sign up for the system and you give your word of honor, and more importantly, your name on a contract, you have to do all this stupid shit, referring to the later version of SEL. And if you break these rules, then there are very serious sanctions for it. Last sentence for me, but in academia, we're now starting to do this with all sort of loyalty oaths, but cute loyalty oaths, where if you want to get promoted to the next level, if you want to get tenure, post-tenure review, this sort of thing, you have to sign a statement affirming your commitment to equity. In some cases, actually, your commitment to, it would be called something like SEL-linked processes, your commitment to full transgender inclusion. So you put that down, and then again, you've both given your word of honor and you've signed a legal contract, you're going to have to do that. So anytime you say something that might be biologically accurate, for example, men aren't women, you can be called in, and your statements can be brought up, and you can be accused of violating this subtle process. So it's kind of like almost the dictatorship of the traditional mother, sort of. You don't want to say that, do you? That my Black and Jewish and so on buddies are very familiar with, but it's the government. It's not your loving mom. It's Justin Trudeau just wearing a fake smile. So this is very problematic. Any quick thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, absolutely. And I would like to expand that idea of compassionate dictatorship. I would like to expand that to that dictatorship right now is the entire culture, because those conversations that you just kind of went through, that's not just the government. Those things are happening in every single workplace.
Mhm.
I was stifled for years, because when I first started noticing, I was like, oh shit, they'll be happy to know that this is the thing that's dividing us, and this thing is actually a political ideology that seeks to destroy your very well-being. But I lost friends. I lost a lot of things. I was actually pushed out of my job because the ideology was written into the job description, and I had to reapply or I was told I could reapply for that job. I would get it, but now the ideology was woven into my job description. So I said, I don't know what I'm going to eat or where I'm going to, but I can't do that. Mm-hmm. So the compassionate dictator, every single DEI bureaucracy, every single now SEL curriculum, every single social anti-racism way that it's currently being framed is through this ideology that seeks to erode the classical liberal society. And if people will disengage, and that's one thing that I'm really hoping to do, is impact the culture. Insert empowered humanity theory, those 6 ideas and practices, insert those in every single DEI, every single SEL, every single anti-racism work in the culture, because if we don't impact the culture now, that compassionate dictator is probably about 10 to 12 years old right now. Mm-hmm. The real tyrants are 10 to 12 years old that haven't seen human faces in a few years, that were locked in their rooms and in their houses for a few years. And now they're getting this ideology that these people are good, these people are bad. If you want power and status, you can say you're one of these people. So kids are the real dictator. Right now, it is that compassionate dictatorship moving its way through the culture. But once that idea works its way through the culture for 5 to 10 years, the real tyrants are 10 to 12 years old right now.
Yeah, the underlying ideas here actually aren't compassionate at all.
No.
To some extent. I mean, that the American system is institutionally oppressive. There are characteristics that are at least deep cultural, if not genetic, that whites, for example, have. I mean, all of this stuff is, the term cultural Marxism is hotly debated, but at very least shares characteristics with a philosophy that killed 100 million people. So that's the thing to remember, that there are only so many human ideas. You know, NRX, the new hard right idea, is just monarchy. You know, this stuff, a compassionate, more socialist America, is just communism. There are only so many things that humans have conceived of over the years. So this strikes me as a set of extremely bad ideas that right now are being delivered to well-intentioned middle class, I think especially white people. I don't think me or Charles or Shamika is really going for this right now. But in this pleasant guise, and sooner or later that guise is going to fall down. You're going to see, you know, the fangs under the hood.
I wish that would be sooner than later. What oppressed group you're in, or your future children or future unborn grandchildren will be in, if this thing is successful, it don't matter. Nobody's going to have any autonomy, because the whole goal is to remove personal autonomy and to remove sovereignty and to conquer that thing within human beings that makes us want to live our life and pursue our own interest and think our own thoughts, just that whole essence of being human is being deliberately attacked right now.
Well, so let's finish up by talking about what we do about it, how we push back against it, talk about your work and what you're doing, and this uphill battle, and see if we can change anything.
So what I'm hoping to do, and my thought partner is Eric Smith. So I'll say what we are hoping to do is really impact the culture. If we don't change the ideas and the attitudes in the culture right now, remember that 10, 12-year-old tyrant that I talked about? If we can begin to impact the culture now, then that will soften up, and those kids will understand valuing the individual. So really the impacting the culture through social and emotional learning, through DEI, through anti-racism. Eric and I are also, we're putting on a workshop this summer called Fourth Wave Anti-Racism. And that's one of the movements that we're going to really be doing, is to completely elevate and bypass what Kendi and what everybody is talking about anti-racism now, because it's cultivating racism. When we strengthen that in-group, when we strengthen our in-group bias, we all have that in-group bias preference. When we strengthen the capacity for prejudice, aggression, and cruelty, that's where racism comes from. So Kendi's message and everybody that's doing this anti-racism work right now, they're actually psychologically strengthening racism in the minds and in the hearts of people. So we are looking to intercept those things through educator training, through corporate trainings. And then also we have another event where Eric and I are going to give a talk, give a lecture. And then after that, we have a psychedelic hip hop band, Cadillac Music, that is going to perform to kind of have this just big celebration and really get something else going in our culture. So we've got a couple of different events. We do hope to replicate those across the country and engage schools, engage businesses, engage communities that don't want destructive ideological practices tearing up their communities anymore, and that are ready to come together and unite for everything that is good for the sake of our species.